Welcome into Bet the W. I'm your host, Danielle Alvari. The Nuggets won the NBA Finals on Monday night. Hooray, hooray. We're also happy for them. But let's talk about the basketball that is still going on, the WNBA. I thought we'd start off the show with a little good news, bad news. Which, by the way, when someone asks you this, which one do you want first? The bad, right? Like, you want to end on the good news. Anybody who wants the good news first, red flag. Red flag to me. It just is. And also, by the way, I don't know how many people listening partake in TikTok, but a trend going on or a phrase that's been commonly used lately is beige flags, which I was cool enough to watch the videos, but not cool enough to understand the context. But I am knowledgeable enough to use Google. So a beige flag is an odd trait in a romantic partner, but not necessarily a deal breaker. So something that's like sort of an ick, but not necessarily a deal breaker. And the reason I'm telling you this is because I want you guys to be up to date, part of the zeitgeist, and feel hip. That said, let's get into good news, bad news. The bad news is the lines did not go up for this WNBA Tuesday until very late on Monday night. So when the amazing Calvin Wetzel and I had to record together, we didn't have the official lines yet. And believe me, we waited. We waited as long as we could. So we talked through the games, what we would look for, the lines we were looking for, and we actually guessed the lines. The good news, if not great news, depending on who you ask, is we sort of nailed it. We did. I have to pat us on the back here. Should we be making these lines now? Are we ready? So that means that all of the good info that we reference applies. It all worked out. So that's the good news, something to look forward to. I'm going to continue, though, before we get to Calvin, with good news, bad news, because I'm enjoying myself. The bad news is the Mystics are still struggling to cover. They're only 2-6 against the spread this season, but good news. Good news is they have seen 7 straight unders out of 8 games. Is that good news for them? Maybe not, but it's good news for bettors. That's due in large part to their defense. It's the core of this team. When the shots aren't falling, they have that to fall back on, and they are currently first in defensive rating. So that's at least something. They play on Tuesday at the Fever. They opened as 6.5-point favorites. I believe I guessed this at 5.5. It was bet down to 5.5 pretty quickly. People wanting to take the points with the Fever. And I still have to back the Fever here, even at 5.5. And the under, of course, as we referenced, already down to 159.5, opened at 160.5. So some other people liking that as well. I wouldn't want to go much lower than that 159.5, but it's there. Good news, the Dream are getting double digits on the road. Bad news, it's versus the Liberty, but the Liberty have only covered one double-digit spread so far this season, and underdogs have just continued to shine and dominate in the W. Underdogs right now, 29, 18, and 3 against the spread this season, so covering at a rate of 61.5%. And home dogs, by the way, going back to the Fever, that first game, are covering at a rate of 70%. So underdogs, still crushing it. Also, continued bad news. Calvin and I liked the over in this Dream Liberty game, but it has been bet up the wazoo, which, by the way, is not a hip thing to say while we're on what's hip and what's not. I guessed this at 165.5, and it opened at 166.5 and was promptly bet up to 169.5. It could still hit. 170 points could be scored in this game, but I don't like it as much as that opening line for obvious reasons. You could still bet it if you're really jonesing for it. Finally, the last game on Tuesday, the Storm at the Mercury. Good news here. The Storm ride or die with Jewell Loyd. And there's something really beautiful about that. The bad news is she missed a game on Friday. The Storm lost the game, but only by 7 to the Mystics. So again, side eye to what the Mystics are doing right now. And then Jewell Loyd played on Sunday, but shot very poorly. 6 of 22, 1 of 8 from 3. Could be a fluke, or she could be tired or hurt. She's putting this team on her back night in and night out, and it's going to catch up at some point, especially as we're coming up on, a quarter of the way through this 40-game season. Either way, the Mercury are favored by 4.5 or 5 at home. It opened at 4.5. I saw it get bet to 5, back to 4.5. I'm not betting on Phoenix right now. No way. But an under here could be nice. This opened at 161.5 and held, unlike the other Tuesday totals we saw. The issue that could come into play with the under here is the Mercury don't play defense. They're currently 10th in defensive rating. Still, I'll probably play it because I love unders and I'm a glutton for punishment, apparently. Now, this will especially be important if Jewell is not going to be 100%. And last note on Jewell Loyd before I move on. I retweeted a tweet about how a reporter got her name wrong, the pronunciation or something, or maybe it was the spelling. I retweeted it and was like, oh my God, let's bet all of her overs on her props because she's going to be so fired up. And I misspelled her name in the retweet. It's already deleted. Don't go try to find it again. It's embarrassing enough. But I just wanted to air that out because I'm human and we make mistakes. And Lloyd, for everybody wondering, is spelled with one L. And I knew that, but autocorrect got me and I didn't challenge it. So I'm glad that I got that off my chest. I hope you guys can forgive me. We're all learning here. We're all doing our best. That's it for the good news, bad news. If you have good news or bad news to share, please do on Twitter at BetTheWShow. Calvin Wetzel is back, and what are they doing to us? They don't have any lines up at the time of us recording, but I cannot. It would be malpractice for me to not ask your opinion on these games, so we're still going to break them down. But what is going on? We need these lines.
For the record, we're recording Monday night. It's not like we're recording like 2 days in advance. This is Monday night.
Yeah.
The game's Tuesday. It's less than 24 hours. Like, it's time. I don't know what the books are doing. I'm with you. It's really annoying, but
Yeah.
we can still talk about it.
We said, though, maybe when NBA finals are over, we can finally get the attention that we deserve here. But nevertheless, Calvin's been betting first basket props. It's been going extremely well. So we're going to get your thoughts on these games that we have on Tuesday. And we'll also just break these down. So let's start with the first one, the Mystics at the Fever. I'm really glad that I stayed away from playing a side with the Fever on Sunday's game because we had every team in action on Sunday, which means that all the teams we're talking about today had 1 day rest in between their games. My guess for this was Mystics minus 5.5 and the total 162.5. Maybe this is me giving way too much credit to the Fever, but the Mystics are on the road here and they've been struggling. And Elena Deladon did not play on Sunday. What do you think we'll see?
Oh, I think you're definitely giving enough and possibly a little bit too. Yeah, I look at the Fever and the Storm. The Mystics just played the Storm on the road.
Mm-hmm.
I think the Fever are a little bit better team than the Storm. So we can look at those Mystics lines at the Storm, and I think this line should be a little bit closer. Obviously, Elena Deladon's probable, so we're kind of assuming she plays.
Right.
Mystics were favored by, what was it, 7.5 and 5.5, or maybe 6.5 and 4.5, I think, in the game. They had one game with her and one game without her. They had a back-to-back in the Storm. So I could see them being favored by as little as maybe 3.5, maybe 4.5 in this game. Honestly, if we could get 5.5, you could be right, and I think I would take the Fever there. If we get 5.5, I would probably lean towards the Fever, as crazy as it sounds, because the Mystics have just not been that impressive, and the Fever have.
So 5.5, you would take the Fever. If heaven forbid that the Mystics are laying less than that, when would you start to look to the Mystics side? What number would get you interested in this Mystics team on the road right now?
I would go Mystics. I would go Mystics at 1.5 if we get minus 1.5 or minus 2.
Oh my gosh.
I would take the Mystics there. I probably would stay away from the Mystics if we're getting 3.5 or 4.
So as far as this total is concerned, I'm not sure. I have this at 162.5. We'll see what the number ends up being. The Fever have been scoring better, more efficiently, Aaliyah Boston in particular. They like to play fast, but the Mystics are incredibly good at slowing teams down. Their defense is still there, and they actually have seen 7 unders in their first 8 games. Part of that is they're struggling on offense big time. Part of that is they've played the Sun, the Liberty, the Sky. These are really good defenses. And the other part is they've played teams like the Storm and the Lynx, who are also struggling on offense. So I don't know how much that plays in here, but I still think if we get anything in the 160s, I would look under.
Yeah, well, and they played the Storm once without Jewel Lloyd, too, which was a big under.
Yeah.
Do you remember our podcast at the beginning of the season where I said Eric Tebow wants to push the pace more, the Mystics might be an overs team this year? I was really wrong about that. Because
we were both wrong about the Mystics on every count.
Yes. We just completely whiffed on the Mystics. They're 1-7. Like you said, 7 unders, only 1 over. Most unders in the league so far, which is what we saw last year. I thought it'd be different this year, but it's not. So I would continue to ride Mystics unders as long as we get them. If it's 162.5, which seems pretty reasonable, like a number they might hang, but I would probably take the under. I could see this game finishing in the upper 150s.
Yeah, my point was that's the point where I would be really excited to take an under, but honestly, like down to 159.5 maybe.
Yeah.
That's how I feel.
I wouldn't mind taking that under at 159.5. I'd start to get iffy below that, but I think I'd probably still take that.
Yeah, and the Fever on the other side have seen 5 overs in 8 games, but again, have played very different competition. So I think that's definitely at play here. And the Fever still only 2-6 straight up, which I still think does not show the full picture for this team and have been battling in these games, are better against the spread than the Mystics. They're 4-3-1. The Mystics are 2-6 so far, which is why we've said we're going to look to take the points with the Fever here. Everything's pointing that direction for us. And unders. I can't bet an over on this Mystics team right now.
No. No Mystics overs. If you don't like the under, just don't play it. Just don't bet it. Don't bet the over.
Switching gears to the next game, we've seen a little bit more overs. 5 overs in 7 games for the Atlanta Dream, who are at the New York Liberty. And I'm just noticing that the New York Liberty are kind of an over team. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but totals have been going very well for me. I think that I'm on a hot streak right now over the last 2 days of play. I think I'm 8-1, and I think 7 of those were total bets. And they were pre-flop. So we had some good games. We had some good days. Sunday went particularly well, but totals have been going well, so that's why I'm so hyper-fixated on it, if you're wondering. The Liberty, 5 overs in 8 games, surprising for me. And against pretty decent defenses here, and now we have the Dream at the New York Liberty. Obviously, these teams have already played in Atlanta. What do you think?
Yeah, this is over for me. I'm with you. Like the Dream.
I put 165.5. Would you go over?
The pace. I would go over. Yeah, we saw these two teams play, what was it, 5-6 days ago. Mm-hmm. And I think 165.5 was the total for that one. I don't know if you have it there. Correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe 164.5.
No, but wow, I really nailed it if so.
It was around there. That game went over. And if they hang the same line that they did for the previous matchup, I'm taking the over again. If they hang 2 or 3 points higher, I'm probably still taking the over again. If they hang anything in the 160s, honestly, I might still take the over again because you saw the Liberty the other day, all 4 quarters of that game against the Wings hit at least 48 points. They didn't have a single quarter below 48. It's crazy. And this is like a few games worth of this type of play now for both them and the Dream. So to me, there's no way that this line should be in the 160s. I think it probably will because books usually don't catch up to this kind of thing enough. It also, we should say, though, depends on Sabrina playing. Sabrina Ionescu is questionable for this game. I think if she doesn't play, probably bump the total down a couple points. But I'd probably still take the over. I would just wait to see if she's out and then wait for the books to move the total down because she's out and then take the over. But either way, this game screams over to me.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I do have the game. They played on June 9th, the New York Liberty. The total was 165. And again, I made this line 165.5. We'll see what it actually ends up being. And great point by you. See if Sabrina's playing. If not, get the best of that total if you are going to bet an over. And I think I just noticed this because the Liberty, 3 straight overs versus Chicago, the total was 157. Versus Atlanta, it went up to 165. Versus Dallas, the total was 170.5. So we've been seeing these trend upward, obviously based on who the competition is as well. But I think that it'll be interesting to see if this gets close to a 170. That's where it starts to get dicey for me to bet an over. But otherwise, I think we're safe to look that way. What about the spread? I have the Liberty laying 10.5. But they have not been covering these double-digit spreads very well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think they'll probably open at a higher number than that because I believe, do you still have that game that they played a week ago or a few days ago? I think it was 6.5. Was it 6.5?
6.5.
It was 6. There you go. And that game was in Atlanta. This game is in New York. So I think you're going to see, in New York covered that game handily. I think they won by 23. Is that right? In the 20s. So I think you're going to see the spread shift more than 4 points from that previous matchup when you look at both home court shifting and just the way that New York dominated that game. But like you said, the Liberty have been really good at covering these lower spreads and not very good at covering the bigger spreads. So I could easily see this opening more like 12 or 13, maybe 14. But I don't know if we're going to see the Liberty cover that. I might take the Dream if we start getting into the teens because Liberty have been one of those teams who sort of dominate when they're not necessarily supposed to and don't dominate when they are supposed to dominate. So it'll be interesting to see. And obviously, again, this is another one where you have to monitor if Sabrina's in or out because she's probably worth a couple points, maybe a little bit less so because they have Maureen Johannes back, who is an elite backup point guard. And when you plug her in, really still have a 2-point guard look with Sloot and her on the court. The Liberty still should be fine, but I definitely think, that the spread should move a point or two if Sabrina is ruled out.
Yeah, I completely agree. So maybe wait on that depending on what side you want to play there. And more to the point of not covering large spreads, the Liberty have covered a spread larger than 9 once this season. It was their second game versus the Fever. So it was still early. The Fever weren't exactly clicking yet, and maybe the Liberty weren't either, but that was the one time they've covered one of their double-digit spreads. Otherwise, they haven't covered these other ones. So if we are in that double-digit range, I might be interested. I know it's tough because the Dream did just lose to them, like you said, by 23 points on June 9th. It's weird because they had 7 days off between that and that game versus the Aces. So it's not like there was fatigue factored in necessarily. And they were at home. They were at home versus Connecticut. They lost by 12. I don't think that this little mini slump of these 2 games is going to continue for the Dream to such a large extent that you couldn't take double digits on them here. So if we're in the double digit range, especially with something like 12.5, it would be interesting to look at the Dream. I don't know if we're going to get that number. I'll be surprised.
Yeah, well, the mini slump might be the reason we get that number, if anything, because the books might be looking at that. But I agree with you. I think it's a mini slump. I don't think it's going to turn into a prolonged slump. I think the Dream can figure it out. They're not going to win this game, but I think they can hang around with the Liberty for long enough to cover a big double-digit spread.
Yeah, I think that the Mystics were a team that you and a lot of people were very high on going into the season. That has not panned out so far. And the Dream were another team that some people were trying to say positive things about for good reason, but something just not able to close these games out yet. And they have to figure it out.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. We've these teams have been hard to figure out, the Mystics and the Dream in particular.
Yes. Well, the last game on Tuesday is the Seattle Storm at the Phoenix Mercury. Nothing hiding here. They've told us where they're at. They're very much in rebuild mode. At least the Storm are. I made the Mercury favorite here, of course, but I couldn't make it more than 2.5. I put this Mercury minus 2.5.
Yeah, this is another one where I'm sort of looking at what the books did with the Mercury Fever, and sort of comparing the Fever to the Storm. And, I think the Fever are a little bit better. So adjust a couple points and then adjust for home court. The Mercury are home. And yeah, I think it's going to be 2.5, maybe 3.5. But the Mercury aren't that much better than the Seattle Storm right now. The Storm might be the worst team in the league, but not by that much. So really, I think the Mercury are going to be favored by about whatever home court is worth, which probably should be 3.5. Maybe we see in a 4.5. I might start to think about the Storm at that point, though.
Yeah. I can't play a spread in this game. It's too many variables for me that are not fun ones to look at. As far as the total, I put this below 160. Is that correct? I put this at 159.5.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a low one. We've seen the Storm really struggle to score, even with Jewel Lloyd back on the court. Still struggle to score. And, the Mercury have had their moments. They went over in their last game, but it's not a team that's necessarily going to fly up and down the court, like the Atlanta Dream or the Dallas Wings. So this total should probably be pretty low. I was going to have it around 160, 161. But it's hard for me to get a read on this if they do hang that, whether, which way to play it. This might be just a stay away total for me if they hang around what we're thinking.
Yeah, this is the game I'm least interested in betting. I'm excited to watch, but least interested in betting. And even looking back at the head-to-heads over the year, which is silly sometimes to do because this record doesn't necessarily predict anything about the current team because we look back on years. But it is interesting that last 6 times these teams have gone head-to-head, only one under. And the totals have all been in that 160 to 161 range that we're talking about. So somehow have been hitting these overs, but again, very different Seattle team than we have this year. So that makes me comfortable looking more towards an under. But again, this game not as exciting for me just because this is some of the bottom teams. Do you think the Mercury will pick up steam later in the season?
No, I don't. To be blunt.
I had to ask because I think there's a lot of talk out there about how well Brittany Griner has looked, and maybe there's something there, and I just think, no, not this season.
No, if anything, I could see it being the opposite. I could see them mailing it in at the end of the season, knowing that they're not really going to get anything out of trying to put all their chips into the table and sneak into the 7 or 8 seed, only get blasted by the Aces or the Liberty in the first round of the playoffs like they did last year. So why not sort of coast the last month or so, take it easy on some of your older players, and see if you can get Caitlin Clark or Paige Beckers or whoever. I don't know if they'll do that, but that's definitely a scenario that I could see happening towards the end of this season.
And maybe they should start thinking about their future because there's a really talented class coming in next year. I don't know. Speaking of the future, Wednesday there's one game. I know we don't have lines for that one, but any thoughts on that one? Sparks at the Wings. It's at 10 a.m. Pacific time. So it's a camp day game. And we were talking before we jumped on, what do we think that means? Usually we assume that means slower play, but maybe not the case.
Yeah, well, when we were talking, we both thought, yeah, these games start early, sometimes 11 a.m. or noon, and
Mm-hmm.
players may come out sluggish. But then we both remembered camp day games vividly in our mind that went way over last season. So it's really something that we probably should look at more data for. I wouldn't necessarily get on here and like make a recommendation one way or the other without having the numbers behind it.
Yeah.
But it's definitely something that could come into effect. Maybe the fourth quarter. Maybe you start to look at things slowing down more in the fourth quarter when legs are a little bit more tired. But it's honestly something I would want to dig into more before like really putting
Yeah,
anything out there.
I don't think it has anything predictive based on these camp days for me so far, but it is an earlier game on Wednesday, so get your bets in early. Hopefully they'll have lines up for you on Tuesday night after all the Tuesday games finish. Calvin, before we let you go, what is your win of the week? What is your win of the week?
All right, so I got another non-betting win for you. I was talking to
Nice.
someone the other day, and I was like, all right, I get on the show with Danielle, and Danielle was like, oh, I went to New York City, or I like hung out with Kevin Hart, and I'm like, oh, I watched basketball, like or I just like I
Living the
don't have that
dream.
cool of a life, but I did go to a new restaurant, new in town. It was very
Okay.
exciting. It's called Chicken Salad Chick, not a paid advertisement, but if I don't know if anyone watches the show who lives in Bloomington, Illinois, probably not. But if you do, you should go there. Great food, great barbecue chicken salad. I will probably be going back. That was my win of the week. It's simple, but
You went out to
sometimes
eat.
sometimes it's the simple things in life
It
that are
is.
really exciting, especially when your life is boring like mine.
Um,
But it was good
Basketball is
food.
great. Most
Ball
of
is
your
life.
stuff is basketball centric.
Ball is
Yeah.
life, Danielle.
Yeah. Calvin lives it. He breathes it, right? He doesn't have time for these new fancy restaurants. So I think that completely embodies the point of win of the week, which is just enjoying the little things in life, celebrating the little wins. And that's a great one. And as always, if you have wins of the week you guys want to share with us that you're listening, then please tweet at them, of course, at Bet the W Show. My win of the week, Calvin knows this. I was in like kind of a fender bender. Like it was a smash of a car accident, but I was more like the person on the side whose car got like bumper boated. So my car's okay. My win of the week is I'm alive, right? And it's a reminder to drive safe out there, everybody. Just keep your head on a swivel, especially if you live in Los Angeles, because it's crazy out there. It's crazy. So we're gonna call that a win, even though even though it was very scary.
It's like you said, the simple things. Being alive,
Being
enjoying being
alive.
alive is a win, Danielle.
Yes. And not having to take my car into the shop. Things could have been so much worse. And it was for other people involved. So just all good things to remember. Little wins. So quick recap. We both liked the Fever getting points. Calvin liked it at pretty much any number. And the under. We liked the Dream getting points if it was in double digits, which it is. And we also liked the over in this game, but so did everyone and their mother. And now it's been bet up to almost 170. Sort of out of territory that I want to look at now, even though it could still hit, depending on how well the Dreams shoot. And finally, liked the under in the Storm and Mercury game. But of course, all of that depends on the status of Jewel Lloyd. Thank you guys for watching. If you like Bet the W, as always, if you can follow the show on the podcast or subscribe to the YouTube, share it, comments, anything you can do to help sort of spread the love of the W, I would really appreciate. We do have one more show this week. Dano Mattia, the friend, the W capper, and Ollie the dog's dad will be headlining. You don't want to miss it. Let's win the week and bet the W.